Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Behold podcast on the Genre Equality channel. I'm Hitzer,
I'm Isa.
and this is a special Valentine's Day episode where we'll be talking about our favorite romantic films of all time. I was very briefly considering doing like a very cynical kind of podcast, it being like an anti-Valentine's Day theme instead of a Valentine's Day theme. Like Midsommar was one I was thinking of. Blue Valentine, of course.
Yeah,
Revolutionary Road, stuff like that. But I figured, we could go for the cynical route next year, lah. Let's go for the positive
yeah,
route first
yeah,
year.
yeah. Just a heads up, guys. Like, if you want a Valentine's Day movie to watch, I would rather you watch any of the things we're talking about today and not Blue Valentine.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, amazing performances from Ryan Gosling and Michelle Williams. I think.
Yeah,
I think might be Gosling's like one of his best performances. But yeah,
agree.
don't watch that
Yeah,
on
please don't
Valentine's.
watch that. Like, I personally know a couple that went to watch that for Valentine's Day, and it was
Oof.
not a good idea. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Revolutionary Road famously reunites Titanic couple Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio
hmm
for an incredible like breakup movie. They play a married couple on the verge of ending things.
yeah,
It's actually quite fantastic, and it sort of makes me imagine like what if they had survived and gotten together.
yeah, yeah. I mean, um it's one of those things, right? Like, all of these the cynical Valentine's Day stuff that we want to talk about, and I guess Eternal Sunshine kind of falls into that
Mm.
in a kind of bittersweet way. But they are excellent excellent performances and excellent movies as well. We should definitely
Yeah.
pick that up next year.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, yeah. Let's do the cynical one next year, lah. But let's start with the positives. We'll be talking about this week a couple of actually three really really famous movies. So I don't think I need to do much of an introduction for them.
Yeah.
The first thing we'll be talking about is the Before Trilogy, by Richard Linklater, starring Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke. It's made out of three films: Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight. And it kind of captures this little minuscule, microcosmic snapshots of a maturing relationship at different points of the relationship,
hmm
which I thought is fascinating. Secondly, we'll be talking about Charlie Kaufman's and Michel Gondry's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which a lot of people our age consider it a classic.
Yeah.
Certainly one of I guess Charlie Kaufman's most accessible films.
Oh
If his
yeah.
latest film is his most inaccessible film, this would be his most accessible film
Yeah,
by far.
for sure.
Then we'll be talking about a really cool little indie romantic comedy called The Big Sick,
hmm
by Kumail Nanjiani and Emily V. Gordon. It's, in my opinion, one of the best rom-com of the 21st century, at least of the last 10 years that I've seen.
Yeah.
And it's particularly notable because the story is true. It's a story about Kumail Nanjiani and his wife,
hmm
Emily V. Gordon, who both of them wrote the film. Lastly, we'll be talking about probably I think the most iconic love triangle in cinematic history. Might even be the first romantic love triangle in cinematic history. I don't know. This was way back in the day.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about Casablanca. We'll always have Paris. A lot of quotable lines from that one.
Mm.
But let's begin with the Before Trilogy, as I mentioned, written and directed by Richard Linklater, starring Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. It started with the 1995 film Before Sunrise, and
Mm.
then followed up with the 2004 film Before Sunset, and most recently the 2013 film Before Midnight. Now let's before we kind of have like this very hindsight is 2020 perspective on the Before Trilogy, right?
Yeah.
But at the time that it was made, the filmmakers and audiences and fans had no idea that there will be a sequel, let alone a trilogy.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, whenever I talk to anyone who's a fan of the trilogy, I always ask, what was the first film you saw of the trilogy, and did you expect there to be a sequel from it?
The first film that I saw was the first film. Like, Before Sunrise was the first film that I saw. Uh,
When do you see it, and how do you see it?
I think I watched it with an ex girlfriend.
Hmm.
Um, from what I remember, right, the first time I saw that, I at that point in time when I saw it, the second film was already out, right?
Mm.
And it had been out for maybe about a year, so like I do remember like kind of seeing the posters being out and stuff like that. But it was highly recommended, or rather I was coerced into making sure that I saw Before Sunrise first before we watched Before uh,
Sunset.
Sunset. Yeah. So so I'm guessing this was probably 2005, so maybe 10 years actually after the original movie released.
Mm, interesting. I first watched Before Sunrise in, I'm gonna say 1999 or 98, because I watched it on VHS or
Oh
VCR.
wow.
Yeah, so it was around that time. It had to be in the late 90s if it was VHS,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Couldn't have been 2000. So I caught it like maybe a few years after Before Sunrise had been released,
Hmm.
and about, I would say, 5 to 6 years before Sunset came out in cinemas. So one thing that like I wanted to point out in terms of my experience of Before Sunset was that I had at least, this gap, this 5 6, not exactly the 9 year gap that
Yeah.
most fans had,
Yeah.
but I had this gap to anticipate. And then, like the first meeting in Before Sunset, the feeling of, waiting so long to see this, the goosebumps and everything. I'm assuming you didn't have that, like, considering you watched them back to back.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I did have kind of a similar feeling with Before Midnight, right? Like there was no news about that. If anything, the third installment of the trilogy was the most surprising for me.
Mm.
Because like I feel like the first two movies were very complete in that sense, right? Like for the
Mhm.
first one, after they've made their promise, second one they fulfilled that promise. So Midnight was the one that kind of caught me off guard when they announced that it was being made, right? So
Mm.
that was what, 7 years, right?
Nine. There are 9 year intervals between
Yeah.
each.
So 9 years, yeah, 9 years after I watched Sunset.
Mm.
So I don't. Yeah, so I didn't exactly have like the same kind of like journey you did with the
Mm.
first and second movie, but with the third movie, I'm guessing it was kind of similar.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, if you haven't seen the film, it follows Jesse and Celine, played by Hawk and Delpy, respectively, who meet on a train to Paris.
Mm.
And when they arrive at his stop in Vienna, he asks Celine to get off the train with him. After all, he asks, when she's an old woman daydreaming about, the man who wandered in and out of her life, her future self will wish she had gone with him. Perhaps the Before Midnight version of Celine might have regretted this.
uh,
Celine's decision to get off the train, of course, kicks off this great love story, spread out over 18 years.
yeah,
Linklater famously, likes to put these three films almost, I mean, not quite real time, but almost real time,
yeah.
following a single interaction between both of them. The first film, certainly not real time, but it takes place over the course of one night. Second film is definitely real time.
Hmm.
Third film takes place over a couple of days. Lah. So what's
Yeah.
interesting about Before Sunrise is that you get to see the maturation of this relationship and how the interactions uh, divulge and differ
Hmm.
depending on what stage they are in their lives. Before Sunset was unabashedly romantic, very positive,
Yeah.
very very optimistic lah. It follows two young people still discovering themselves.
Hmm.
Maybe their conversations sometimes were smart, sometimes were cringy. They haven't had the full experience of maturity yet. Before Sunset, we find out that Celine did not return to the train station as they had promised at the end,
Yeah.
and instead wrote a book about their first encounter. Ethan Hawke's character not quite confronts her, lah, but like realizes that she's doing a book signing.
Yeah.
So decides to go and see her, and then that kicks off, this but the second film, which takes place over real time, where they reconnect, maybe crash out their frustrations at each other, why
Mm.
one didn't, fulfill the promise, and why one did. The third one follows them as a married couple, older in life,
Yeah.
fully matured, maybe now filled with the bitterness and resentment of a long life, lah.
Yeah.
They still clearly love each other,
Hmm.
but the tone of the third film is very, very different.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, man. Which of these are your favorite?
I think Sunrise was definitely, it stands out the most in terms of like the way it sets up everything. Without Sunrise, you don't have the other two films, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like in my mind, it impacted me more. But in terms of like overall in the trilogy itself, some of the scenes in Midnight are extremely memorable and very, very powerful. I think the argument that they have in the hotel room
Mm.
in the third act of the movie is one of the most like realistic arguments I've ever seen a couple have, honestly, and that struck a lot of chords for me.
Hmm.
Yeah, so like if I had to rank, I think it was first, third, and then second movie.
Nice, yeah. My favorite is actually the second film, and
Hmm.
then first and then third. I think the second one, I was impacted by it because of the weight, because of that first moment of interaction when Celine sees Jesse in the bookstore.
Yeah.
That had been like such a long time in the making. It was great. Yeah, I think a big part of why I enjoyed the second film so much was the weight lah, that I feel like a lot of people who are fans of this trilogy didn't have to.
Yeah.
It was surprising like, and in totality though, all three films are actually quite outstanding.
Mm.
Very few flaws to each of them. The first one, to be honest, is probably the strongest of the film if I'm to be talking
Yep.
objectively,
Yeah.
because he has it's a complete story with a perfect ending, a perfectly ambiguous ending, which if they had made no sequels to it would have still stood the test of time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think so. I do know a couple of people who only watched the first one with no knowledge that like the second or the third one exists. And
Mm.
in their mind, like it's a great movie.
Mm-hmm.
So the question then becomes like, given how great Sunset was,
Mm.
right? Was there a need to make Sunrise and Midnight?
Um, of course, like there's never a need to make a sequel, but seeing the trajectory of the relationship, and seeing what like Richard Linklater and Julie and Ethan had done with it, I think they co-wrote Midnight together, which was different from Sunrise and Sunset. That this decision to explore different stages of relationship,
Yeah.
and different how people perceive love at different stages of their life, from from basically young adults to
Hmm.
middle age, was very interesting, and I think made it a very necessary choice. Like, admittedly, I did not see it as necessary at first, but after seeing Midnight, I found it necessary, and I wouldn't mind because like 2022, which is 9 years after 2013, I wouldn't
Yeah.
mind if they do another one.
Yeah, I think that would be fairly interesting, right? Like the way kind of like Midnight ends off in the golden years, so to say, of their relationship. It would be
Mm.
really kind of fascinating to see kind of like where they go with the characters, right? I feel like a lot of it also has to do with the fact that we follow the same actors throughout this 18-year period.
Mm. It allows
And
them a time to age, lah.
yeah, it allows them time to age, but also in between they start to accumulate like a really interesting body of work. At least Ethan Hawke has done like a fair bit during
Mm.
the 18 years in between the films.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that kind of shows up in in the acting
Mm.
as they kind of get older as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree lah. Like, Sunrise, as I mentioned, is a very optimistic film, and Sunset is a bit sadder.
Yeah.
It kind of lets the pair effortlessly kind of fall back into the rhythm of their conversation, awkwardly at first and easily later. Even as kind of the pain of the years they spent apart deepens, and they slowly reveal the ways that their night together 9 years ago has changed and shaped them.
Mm,
I think like the fiery passion of Sunrise is still present there. It's just tinged in pain and yearning, lah. And the promise of the final moments of the first films is one of the most perfect endings ever put together.
yeah.
But exploring what happens after that is also interesting. And I think Before Midnight also finds new ways to chart the growth for Jesse and Celine, even as it explores the consequences and rewards of the life that they've built together in the years since Sunset. The heated romantic tension of the first two films
Hmm.
definitely cooled by now, but Hawk and Delpy are more watchable than ever in many ways, and their exchanges are wryer and funnier because they know each other better.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, that the film builds to this blistering extended argument between the two, one that wisely allows both characters to be, I think, right and wrong in equal measure.
Hmm.
Linklater is a specialist in naturalistic conversational dialogue,
Yeah.
a bit more stylized than Noah Baumbach, but way less didactic than Aaron Sorkin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's how I would describe it. But it's an incredible achievement lah, to do this kind of very small, low key, low stakes
Mm.
film, and have it be as memorable as they are. I think one of the main reasons that before trilogy is so memorable is the dialogue. You know, it's
Mm,
it's entirely dialogue driven throughout all three films. You know,
yeah.
what do you think about the writing and the dialogue and how it's executed by the actors?
I think like dialogue features the most heavily as the trilogy goes along, right?
Mm,
There is all three shows are set in incredibly picturesque locations, right? Like you got Vienna, you got Paris, and then you have some island, some village in Greece.
mm,
But I feel that there is a lot more to kind of carry um the plot or the story as it is for the first movie than there is in the third movie. Like when we boil down to it, it follows the course of the conversation, right? If over the 18 years that they are essentially having throughout this entire time, right? Like this is um when he asks, you're like, you're gonna regret this, right? Not coming with me. And
mm-hmm,
then like 18 years later, it's kind of like the answer that we get to that, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So I feel like dialogue features more heavily and becomes more important as the movies go along. So
mm-hmm,
much so that at the end of the day, at the end of midnight, in fact, it is entirely just conversation. It's two people having conversation. They're not going around. They're not, you're being talking to random poets in a boat.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yeah.
They're not like interacting with people on the bridge or anything of the sort.
Mm,
So like it's so natural and so interesting that most of the time you forget that at the end of the day, like it is really just one extended conversation over the course of the trilogy.
mm-hmm,
But the other features around it seem to diminish in importance or even diminish in an amount of screen time that it has
mm-hmm.
when we hit midnight.
Yeah, yeah. Crazy enough, actually, Midnight has the biggest, I wouldn't say ensemble, but the biggest cast of supporting characters of any of the films.
Yeah.
Because they're staying with other people, they're having this big dinner conversations with a bunch of other people, stuff that
Hmm.
we never had in Sunset and Sunrise. But it
Yeah.
actually feels a lot more personal and a
Yeah.
lot deeper because it's kind of it's cutting to the truth of their tension.
Yeah.
Like they still clearly like love each other, but there are realities uh to a relationship, like
Hmm.
resentments build up, bitterness builds up. The crackling uncertainty of Before Sunrise is completely gone to a certainness, that they know each
Yeah.
other so well, they can poke and prod at each other's like weaknesses,
Hmm.
but at the same time their mutual attraction is still there.
Yeah.
I love the ending to Before Midnight also. I mean, even
Mm.
past the conversation, even as Jesse tries to reconcile, tries to strike up this very fake meet cute again, and Celine's not having it.
Yeah.
It's really cool, and there's no twist, there's no kind of quote unquote plot to get
Mhm.
in the way. It's very character driven cinema, which as I grow older, like I seem to prefer more to plot driven cinema.
Yeah, yeah, certainly, certainly. I think it's just people who are fans of the trilogy as a whole. I think by and large, like we recognize how real the
Mm,
relationship that is captured is. Right, every movie discusses a very different stage of what a real life relationship would look like.
mm,
And for the people who have been in relationships and can see a mirror of themselves in the characters, like that just further cements how great the trilogy as a whole is.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, so I mean, like that's very little to complain about, like just in terms of the writing, the way that it's shot, the pacing across the 18 years. I'm just
mm,
very curious to know what someone who's never watched the trilogy before and decides to watch it back to back, would they have a difference of opinion, right? Like we've already talked about the fact that you had to wait before Sunrise came out, and
mm,
we both had to wait before Midnight came out, and that kind of
mm,
like framed the context in which we view the films, right?
mm,
Because with that time skip, so to say, right, we grow in as well, and
alongside the characters, lah.
alongside the characters, it informs our understanding of what happened before and what's happening to them now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. I think if I don't know, do we have someone who has never watched that? I would love to try an experiment.
Oh, I think Isa has never seen the Before trilogy.
Yeah,
I always make fun of him because he seems like the type that would be a fan of this, but
yeah.
he's actually never seen it, which is very interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting thought experiment, because I feel that when I was watching Before Sunrise, I wasn't, I was young, much younger, and I think, how
Mm.
old I was, 13, 14, 15, around that age.
Yeah.
So I think I was thinking with the same thought processes as Jesse and Celine at that time. I thought what they were saying was so smart, was so clever. And then as I reached like young adulthood, you sort of realize how kind of corny some of their, like, pickup lines were
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was more real, a bit more cynical, a bit sadder, a bit, but also a bit more truthful, because they know what life is now.
Yeah.
I have yet to reach the stage of Before Midnight, so I can't quite say how realistic that is, but
Yeah.
it feels realistic. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do wonder what these kinds of movies would look like in the modern day, like if they had met on Tinder or something.
Yeah. I mean, like it's an absolutely different kind of frame of reference, right?
Like if someone
Um,
did a remake of this, it would actually, I think, would be interesting.
yeah, I don't know if like say for example it becomes a Tinder movie, right? Or at least Sunrise becomes a Tinder movie.
Mm,
Or Sunrise becomes a Tinder movie.
yeah.
I don't know if a relationship like that necessarily would be able to span the 18 years, right?
Mm,
Like I don't know if that it would most likely end up like anything that we get on Netflix these days.
mm,
And like and I think so much of it has so much of the strength of this has to do with the time skips, the 9 year gaps,
mm,
more so than say like Boyhood, right? So Boyhood, we follow along the kid's journey throughout everything. For those that don't know, Boyhood was another movie made by Linklater, that spent
filmed over 14 years, right?
14 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
like that didn't quite have the same impact, right?
Because I didn't go through the 14 years. I watched it in 90 minutes, or,
Yeah,
or, or whatever the runtime was like.
yeah, exactly. So I don't think it would have the same impact. Just because modern dating is, I feel at least, right, in comparison to what we see in the trilogy, is a lot more. Um, it focuses around the convenience of having these platforms, right, to facilitate communication, to facilitate meetups, and all of that.
Mm,
Many of them are one-off. A lot of it is about throwing your net into the sea and seeing how many fish you can catch.
mm,
So I don't know if it will work. It would be an interesting um endeavor for sure, right? To
yeah.
see if like the way technology has essentially changed the way we meet people
Mm-hmm.
would give us something similar or something totally different.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could even imagine like a fourth Before film taking place, during COVID over Zoom, like they're divorced, and they're, I
Yeah,
think, like maybe Ethan is like checking up on their kids or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah. That would be interesting too. But like the reason I asked that question is because I feel like the Before films couldn't have taken place at any other time than the times
um
that they were made, lah.
yeah, yeah.
Like it wouldn't have been as successful now,
Hmm.
for sure, or before, like they are entirely products of the time.
Absolutely,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. So I find it hard to think of it in any other scenario, or in another setting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the trotting nature of it makes it very difficult to be filming now if they want to release a fourth one in 2022.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, we are
Yeah,
due, right? So 2022 would be the 9 years.
yeah, after 2013, correct.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I don't know. I don't know. We'll see what if Linklater has something up his sleeve. It would be
Yeah.
it would be really interesting to see what a relationship like that looks like in the times we live in right now, right? Like with
Mm-hmm.
isolation, with the pandemic, even I mean, even just talking about technology itself in the course of the three movies, right? Like we don't have
Mm-hmm.
handphones in the first movie,
Mm-hmm.
and in Midnight they're on their phones a fair bit actually,
Yeah.
here and there
Yeah.
while they're having their discussions and all of that, and it's super interesting to see that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll see. We don't have any word of it yet, right?
No, no, but they usually come together and write it and shoot it over the course of a couple of months.
Yeah.
It's a very quick process. So they could get together next year. It maybe COVID is over, who knows? And they could do another one. One can hope.
Mm.
There's always room for the Before franchise, I would say, to further expand, because uh, they could always explore different facets. Your life continues to change,
Yeah, absolutely.
your perceptions of romantic love continues to change as you grow older, and it will never stop happening. Like change
Mm,
is, I guess, the one constant, and which is what makes this relationship so very human and so very relatable to audiences, which is in why it's also so memorable.
yeah, agreed.
And also, of course, like it wouldn't work without the writing of Linklater, without the chemistry of Hawk
Mm.
and Delpy. They I think they know these people inside out to the point where
Yeah.
it's so easy to write a new dialogue driven script for a new one. It's
Yeah.
just let's get in character and write at each other.
Yeah. I would love to see that. I really, really would. Just to see like how distant changes the dialogue. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. Like, what are your like favorite moments or scenes from the three films?
Oh wow. I think we've talked about a couple of them. I think Ethan Hawke's speech to Delpy in the train is one of the greatest pickup lines in the history of mankind.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, um, at the point in time when I was watching it, I was just like, "Wow, this guy's got game." And then, like on subsequent watches, I'm just like, sketchy, so
Yeah, is it?
sketchy."
Yeah. As
Yeah,
you
it
grow
would.
older, you realize how sketchy it
It
is.
was
Yeah.
so sketchy. I think the moment that they had with the poet by the waterside is very
Mm.
memorable to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've brought up in the second movie when he walks into the bookstore, that was a very powerful scene for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then from midnight, the extended argument and of course kind of the closing on the bench out by the river
Yeah.
were the two things that stood out to me the most. I mean, like they had some incredible dialogue over the dinner table
Mm-hmm.
and in the car as well, but like those two specifically were just like outstanding.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, those final moments of Before Midnight, I actually feel are the heights of the trilogy, which is
Mm,
strange to say, like a trilogy that gets stronger with every movie, but the richness of depth and the richness of feeling that we feel through those conversations at the end of Before Midnight had to be built upon what
yeah,
happened in Sunrise and
yeah.
Sunset lah. It's great. My favorite film, I mean, aside from all the things you've already mentioned,
Mm.
I think was that time when they went to the record store and then they were
Oh,
listening to Kev Bloom's "Come Here."
yeah.
The trying to look at each other but not looking at each other moment
Hmm.
was very, very well done. Very, very cute.
Yeah, yeah. I really like that. I mean, like that's one of the moments that people point to the most, man. Right.
Mm.
Yeah. So many memorable moments, so many quotable quotes, and I think that's kind of true of almost everything. Well, the three big movies at least that we're going to be that we're discussing on this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, quotable quotes and all of that. Uh, yeah, I don't think it's possible, right? Okay, do you think it's possible to watch any of the trilogy on its own, with the exception of the first movie, right? Could you watch Sunset without having watched Sunrise?
I know a few people who watch Sunset without watching Sunrise and enjoyed it a lot. Midnight is
Yeah,
possible, but you won't get the full depth of it.
yeah, agreed, agreed. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's like incredibly difficult to get the full experience without having it build upon one another.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Definitely, man. Let's move on to an equally kind of iconic film among I would say millennials and Gen X's,
Yeah.
people of that age. I think Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, the 2004 sci-fi film by Charlie Kaufman, directed by Michel Gondry. It follows this estranged couple who have erased each other's memories.
Mm.
One of the couple is Jim Carrey in one of his rare dramatic performances, and the other is Kate Winslet. And this employs elements of a psychological thriller, a non-linear mystery-driven narrative, kind
Mm-hmm.
of to explore the nature of memory and romantic love. From how I described it, you might think that it's a very kind of challenging, obtuse, Nolan-esque, Memento-ish kind of film, but it really isn't.
Yeah.
If I'm thinking of ending things, as I mentioned, is no is Kaufman's most challenging film.
Yeah.
This is probably his most romantic and accessible, easy to watch film.
Yeah.
It is very high concept. A lot of the cinematography and the writing tricks are also very high concept,
Hmm.
but it's done so elegantly and with such a feeling, and so really relatable. The idea of trying to recapture something, moments that are lost,
Hmm.
that is so easy to understand despite the very high concept sci-fi nature of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Since this was your pick, like, what do you love about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
Um, okay, so just for kind of context, I had a friend bring me to watch Eternal Sunshine. At that point in
Mm,
time, I don't think I was very big into to indie anything really, as far as cinema goes. So Eternal Sunshine was probably one of the first times that I went in to start enjoying, a movie like this.
yep,
And
yep.
of course, like as it goes, I had a huge crush on this girl at that point in time. So it's a special. It's especially kind of like special to me because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then in conjunction to that, for some reason, I think in my early 20s, I started this thing that every Valentine's Day I will watch Eternal Sunshine just because the opening line mentions Valentine's Day, right?
Yeah, yeah. The first scene takes place during Valentine's Day, right?
Yeah, and I always thought like, this is one of my favorite films, and I make it a point to watch it once a year.
Mm,
I think what was interesting to me that at the point in time when I watched it for the first time, right, there is a slight kind of twist. There's a bit of a mystery that you're kind of figure out and unpack until you reach the third act of the movie itself. And just the way in which Kaufman has crafted this, combined with the fact that Gondry at the time was maybe felt a bit more free
mm-hmm,
to kind of like do what he wanted to do.
mm-hmm,
Just made it gave this extremely magical kind of ethereal feeling to a very complex love story, right?
mm-hmm.
That surprised me and made me extremely fond of this movie just because of the way that it was executed.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you say that it's complex because it is in structure,
Yeah,
but the actual love story is not,
yeah,
which is what makes it, very relatable.
yeah,
This story told in reverse trope has become a very common device in film,
yeah.
to the point where it's kind of lost its novelty already. But Eternal Sunshine doesn't utilize this device to conceal information from the audience. It's not a cheat in that way.
Mm,
Kaufman and Gondry use it to a different end, in to show you how uncovering forgotten emotions, not hidden facts, forgotten emotions,
mm,
can affect you. There are no unexpected twists or sudden revelations
yeah,
about Joe and Clementine. It's just a wistful backward view of love's decay.
yeah.
It's kind of unlike Kaufman's previous work at the time, like Being John Malkovich adaptation. It's not out to kind of stun us with the originality of the gimmicks.
Yeah.
Although this film is fairly original, but it rather wants us to wind back to earnest familiarity of its sentiment. The
Yeah.
idea that all relationships end on a bad note. Clearly, lah,
Mm,
as Dr. Manhattan says, all relationships end in tragedy by definition.
yeah.
But you tend to remember only the end of it, and you want to forget everything to kind of erase the pain of the end of relationship, right? So you
Hmm.
only remember the bad parts of it. The trick of the film is to use this device to take us through the bad parts and then back to the good parts to
Yeah.
remind you that it's not everything is as bad as it seems. There were good moments, there were bad moments, of course, but
Hmm.
you have to take both of them. That's the real definition of relationship,
Yeah.
you take the good with the bad. Also, I really enjoyed Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind because at the time, I think this was 2004, right?
Yes, 2004. That's right.
Yeah. So I don't know whether you were aware of this whole trope back in the mid 2000s to early 2000s. This whole like depressed, witty. Male guy, introverted,
Yeah.
meets the manic pixie dream girl.
Yeah. So it's the sad
Uh,
boy, sad boy
sad boy
manifesting
manic
goal.
pixie dream girl kind of trope, right?
Yeah.
um this this film, it starts out following that trope, of a 500 days of summer trope or whatever, right?
Yep.
But the film's fascinating conjecture is that the manic pixie dream girl and indie hero are probably crackled by their opposing creative energies at first, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That is the spark of the attraction. But the film goes on to reveal that they probably aren't very well suited for each other,
Yeah.
you know. Not because either one is a villain, but because of like basic incompatibility lah.
Yeah.
And yet again and again they choose to give this romance a shot anyway, you know, as is the surprise ending of the film. Like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they memories are erased, they meet each other for the first time, they're gonna give it a shot again. It's bittersweet in a sense because, you know, hey, you know, like they really have this internal depth of feeling that transcends, you know, rational memory. Like
Yeah.
like, you know, you could say that they belong together,
Mm-hmm.
but in the end it's also tragic because, you know, it's going to end badly again.
Yeah.
um Great. Yeah, I love that kind of very sly, very subtle dissection of that trope, of those two tropes lah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. I think as I get older, I become more and more fond of films, high concept films who use the medium to
Mm.
convey the concept, right? And the way kind of like Eternal Sunshine is shot, especially the large portion, a lot of the middle portions of the film,
Mm-hmm.
they're all shot in kind of these vignettes, right? So in a film that's talking about kind of like memory, you know, and all these like kind of ethereal dreamscapes that you kind of wander through within your memory itself.
Mm.
It cements this as such a great film for me, you know, and like it continues to be something that I am just extremely fond of, right? Like I've watched this yearly for more than a decade now, and every time I watch it, you know, it's a trip, right, kind of down memory lane with all the people that I've watched it with, and you know, just kind of like at this point in time I've kind of memorized the script, like all the dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I occasionally, if I'm getting up to get a drink or something, I find myself kind of mouthing along, which
Mm-hmm.
can get annoying, so I'm told.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you know, so this is just one of my favorite films. It's definitely up there in my top 10,
Mm.
and definitely one of my favorite Valentine's Day films for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely same here. You know, also like to cap off, I do have to say that a lot of people forget that this film had like a really great supporting cast. Elijah Wood
Mm.
was in it, Mark Ruffalo was in it, Kristen Dunst was in it, Tom Wilkinson was in it. A lot of really good actors that you forget
Yeah.
are not in it. Although like, you know, Mark Ruffalo, Elijah Wood, and Kristen Dunst have like a lot of memorable, very memorable scenes in it
Yeah,
too.
yeah, they do.
Yeah, all of it is really good. That, you know, even the side story of Kristen Dunst, you know,
Yeah.
it's very it's kind of emblematic or microcosm lah of Joe and Clementine's story.
Mm, mm.
In the end, yeah, I love this film. One of my top 10, I think, romantic films of all time as well, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other things you wanna mention about like how special it is or why people should watch it if they haven't?
Oh man.
Before we move on.
I think Eternal Sunshine is one of those films. I with John Bryan on music duty,
Oh
like
yeah, yeah, yeah. I forgot about that.
the moment you hear a tune from that, like immediately you can revisit the scene, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's just one of those special things, you know. Sometimes like you don't always get that, um, especially in cinema these days. You know, like it's so iconic. Hearing some of the melodies that he's used and some of the songs that he's picked out for the soundtrack itself. Like in addition to like the movie being one of my favorite, the soundtrack is also one of my favorite.
Indeed. I am one of those few people who saw Being John Malkovich in cinemas.
Oh man.
So like, yeah, day one, like Charlie Kaufman fan lah,
Yeah.
or at least like towards the ground floor. I saw adaptation in cinemas as well.
Yeah.
Both of those films had to drag friends to go watch it. 'Cause I don't think anyone at that point in, I think, primary six and then sec two or sec three were interested in this kind of films.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I tried like, so a lot of people like didn't like them, and I had like, you know, just this one group of fans at the time who like I keep dragging to like art films that they don't like, and
Mm,
then I was like, hey, Charlie Kaufman has a new movie, Eternal Sunshine is out there. This film they liked,
yeah.
and then that blew my mind because it wasn't any less smart than his two previous films,
Yeah.
but it also has an accessibility that everyone can enjoy, which probably makes it like Charlie Kaufman's most successful film.
Yeah, for sure. Easily.
Yeah.
Easily. I
Yeah.
mean like given everything that Kaufman has done, right? Like he always kind of outdoes himself, but I don't think he will ever kind of replicate the success that he's had with Eternal Sunshine, right?
Mhm.
Like all the stuff that he's done after Eternal Sunshine, right? Or even Condry for that matter, all the stuff that he's done after Eternal Sunshine never quite has been so well received. You
Hmm.
don't have to be into the high concept cinema. You don't have to be into indie cinema and all that, right? Eternal Sunshine just becomes this movie that even if you don't want to think too deeply about it, you're gonna enjoy it for what it is.
Hmm.
The visuals and the music and all of that, and I think it's the emotional core of the movie that really strikes people above and beyond all that. And if you're into the concept and you're in and you love what Kaufman has done, then it
Hmm.
just becomes that much more.
Definitely, for those who are new to Charlie Kaufman, like you should check out his entire discography. But I think you should watch Eternal Sunshine first. It's a
Yeah.
very good, like it's like the marijuana of Charlie Kaufman. Like it's a good gateway drug before you
Yeah.
get into like the really really hard drugs of like Synecdoche, New York, or
Oh,
I'm thinking of ending things.
yeah. Okay, so just kind of a side note, right? If you
Yeah.
were to advise people to go on a Kaufman binge and they should start with Eternal Sunshine, where should they go after that? Because I think that's pretty difficult to do.
Eternal Sunshine first, and then you do Anomalisa, the stop
Oh,
motion
yeah,
animated
yeah.
one,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
and then adaptation, which is actually clever in concept about Charlie Kaufman was trying to adapt the Orchid Thief, and then he
Yeah.
couldn't adapt the Orchid Thief, so he wrote about himself trying to adapt the Orchid Thief. Clever but easy to understand, and
Yeah.
then being John Malkovich,
Hmm.
and then Synecdoche, New York,
Yeah.
and then I'm thinking of ending things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I totally agree with that for sure. For sure.
Yeah, yeah, to really prepare you for everything.
Yeah. I think I went from Eternal Sunshine straight into Malkovich adaptation and then Sinataki, if I remember
Mm.
correctly. So like that was quite a that wasn't easy for sure. But yeah, I mean he's has given any one of you who wants to kind of like catch up on Kaufman, that's the way to kind of go about it.
Indeed, it's Kaufman is only going to get more dense from now on. I don't mean that as like a criticism. I like dense Kaufman. He's
Yeah.
done the accessible parts. He's done the easy to understand ones. I
Yeah.
like him trying to add layers upon the many layers he already has. And because Charlie Kaufman right now is directing his own films, he
Mm.
has no more like censor. There's no one. There's no one to like balance him. There isn't a Spike Jones or a Michel Gondry
Yeah.
there to be like, hey, how about we make this a bit easier to understand, or we can express it a bit differently visually, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I both like and dislike it that Charlie Kaufman is directing his own things.
Yeah.
I don't think he's made a bad film yet. So until he makes a misstep like Tenet, then I'm
Uh,
still I'm still down with him.
okay, cool. I mean, I don't think he will. I'm really hoping he won't have a misstep like that. But yeah, so both big fans of Charlie Kaufman. Eternal Sunshine, one of our favorite Valentine's Day movies.
Hmm.
Again, very very quotable, as any of you who have watched it or are going to watch it will find. Um,
Yeah, definitely, man. Next up, let's talk about a 2017 romantic comedy film directed by Michael Showalter and written by Emily V. Gordon and Kumail Nanjiani, who
hmm,
at that time was coming off a pretty prominent role in an HBO show called Silicon Valley. Lah.
mm-hmm,
Of course, since then, Kumail Nanjiani has become one of the bigger movie stars. Definitely one of the biggest Indian movie stars in Hollywood. But at that time, he wasn't quite so well known.
yeah,
So this story about Kumail and his wife Emily, it's a real story, a true story, based on the real life romance, and it follows kind of this inter-ethnic couple who must deal with cultural differences after Emily, who in the film is played by Zoe Kazan, becomes ill. I thoroughly enjoyed this film. I hadn't seen at that time, like 2017. I hadn't seen a really great rom com
yeah,
since maybe like the Meg Ryan days, the When Harry Met Sally days.
yeah,
It's been like about 20 years of like a lot of like kind of like meh
meh, yeah,
Jennifer Garner kind of stuff, like not bad. They were okay, but just nothing this special,
yeah,
and certainly nothing this with this kind of specificity, which added like a different kind of angle to approach the romantic comedy, through a kind of a second generation immigrant story.
hmm,
Reminded me a lot of Master of None also, lah.
yeah.
And this movie stands out to me always. I haven't rewatched it recently, but it always stands out to me always because it has. I remember it eliciting the biggest laugh I've ever had in the cinema.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's this one scene that I could not control my laughter. It was I don't want to spoil the joke, but I just want to say that it's the best 9/11 joke ever put
Oh,
on film.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, let's not spoil that. But yeah, I
Yeah,
totally agree with you.
phenomenal punchline, best 9/11 joke I've ever seen. A lot of people might say it's too early to joke about it, but no, this joke proves that it's not. It was a really funny joke. You watched it for the first time recently. What did you
Yes.
think of it?
Oh, I mean, it's such a cute movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, on top of that, right? Like just the chemistry between Kumail and, oh no, what's the actress's name?
Zoe Kazan, who plays his real life wife Emily. Lah.
Yeah, I mean, really, really solid acting overall. I think like Kumail playing himself or whatever he sees himself to be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, was really solid. I mean, like for me, I discovered Kumail through his stand-up routines.
Mm.
Just one of those things where you see it on Comedy Central, or you just kind of like scrolling around. I always thought it was funny, guy. So when you recommended Big Sick, and I went to check it out, I was surprised to see that it was him first of all, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a real life story.
Mm-hmm.
Because clearly for some people, I think this is definitely going to remind them of what's it called?
Master of None.
No, 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 no. The Sandra Bullock, Bill Pullman. While you were
Uh,
sleeping.
while you were
Yeah,
sleeping. Yeah,
yeah. While you were
yeah.
sleeping, right? But this is while you were sleeping, but in real life,
Mm.
essentially. And I thought I mean, the premise of that tickled me. But to kind of see the way in which he develops a relationship with her parents, and like how that kind of like furthers his affections for her,
Mm.
and further enlightens him to his own ethnic heritage and identity and culture, and his relationship with his parents is incredibly well written.
Mm-hmm.
Just the way that that plays out in such a realistic way, like with all the awkwardness and the silences and the miscommunications that are being thrown around, and all the tension of having a loved one in a coma,
Mm-hmm.
really caught me off guard, right? Because much like Eternal Sunshine, this is such an easy watch,
Yep.
but carries with it the weight of so many things that are so personal at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the reasons this is one of the best rom-coms in recent years
Hmm.
is that it doesn't shy away from heavy topics
Yeah,
or realism. Rom-coms traditionally have this veneer of escapism to it,
yeah.
escapist fantasy to it,
Mm.
which is what makes it a lot of comfort, like comfort food, like fast food kind of cinema.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but The Big Sick isn't comfort food kind of cinema because it
No.
tackles, illness and religion, the cultural divisions and cultural struggles between generations,
Hmm.
between the new and old relationships, and it faces it with a lot of authenticity and good humor. This isn't escapist fantasy
Yeah.
primarily because it feels like a real story because it
It
is
is
a
a real,
real
yeah.
story.
Hmm.
Like, why don't these topics crop up more in comedy? Probably because I think comedies kind of follow the dinner party rule, like don't bring up politics, don't bring up anything too serious or anything too divisive. You want
Yeah.
something that is generally happy go lucky and everyone can enjoy. But I think there's a value in being specific in in
Mm.
in love story or in any stories, not just love stories.
Yeah.
The specificity makes it more universal, and I'm beginning to realize that, like, as I watch more culturally specific things, like,
Yeah.
um, Gordon and Nanjiani just kind of go for it. The pair, have intense chemistry. They're incredibly likable together,
Hmm.
very strong, and you invest immediately in wanting them to be together.
Yeah.
Kazan especially is great at playing Emily. I don't know how the real Emily feels about that. But as as just a pure rom com is good.
Yeah.
As a pure comedy, it's really great. As I
Yeah.
as I mentioned,
Yeah.
at that particular time, the struggles of being, I think, Muslim
Hmm.
in America at that time, uh, was no laughing matter, and but they could make it a laughing matter because it's so real. How do you not laugh at it? Again, best 9/11 joke in the world.
Yeah.
It also follows the Kumail in his struggling stand-up comic phase,
Hmm.
driving as an Uber driver and doing sets on stage at some comedy club in Chicago, all things he really did. Then trekking out to his parents' house in the suburbs for family dinners. He's Pakistani, he's raised Muslim, and he's not sure sure that he subscribes to the beliefs that he grew up with, very very Master of None esque, or Rami esque, and his parents are kind of set on finding him a wife by bringing every single girl in their community over for dinner. The girls arrive with headshots, which he puts in a cigar box on his dresser when he gets home.
Yeah.
But he's smitten by this girl who heckles him one night at the show, Emily. They,
Yeah.
they hook up. Although at first they both seem kind of allergic to commitment,
Hmm.
but their relationship starts to take on a life of its own. Like eventually, they admit that they're together, even while Kumail keeps Emily a secret from his parents,
Yeah.
who definitely won't be thrilled, and vice versa too. Then one day Emily lands in hospital. She has a mysterious infection. Her parents come to town, and one of the best parts of the movie actually isn't Kumail and Emily. The best part of the movie is Kumail and Emily's family.
Yeah.
And huge credit has to go to supporting actors, Ray Romano from Everybody Loves Raymond, everybody knows, and Holly Hunter, who are
Mhm.
great as Emily's parents. I really enjoyed them.
Yeah. Yeah. Shout out to the two of them. Like, I think this is the most surprising role from Ray Romano that I've ever seen. Not that I've seen him in that much outside of Everybody Loves Raymond.
Mm,
But yeah, just like it caught me a bit off guard. I mean, it's like, oh my god, it's Ray Romano, and the way that he, in particular for me, the way that he interacts with Kumail
mm-hmm,
is surprising and heartwarming and touching. Whereas Kumail's uh interaction with the mother, it takes a slightly more kind of serious, warm tone.
mm-hmm,
And both of them like in concert together is just like this amazing kind of story, um in unusual circumstances, in special circumstances, uh
yeah.
that is so heartwarming and so well earned. I think the point in time when Emily kind of wakes up and everybody has to reckon with the fact that she's awake, and that doesn't mean what has changed around her has changed with her. For
Mm,
all the characters, that particular moment in the hallway in the hospital when the parents are talking to him separately,
yep, yep.
that hit pretty hard, and it's like it's so well earned, right? Like that moment was so well earned. They put in all the work that was there, all the strange beats that they had to kind of like navigate through, and yeah, that just makes it a special film.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think rarely in intergenerational comedy are parents and adult children granted equal complexity.
Mm,
Like sometimes you're shown a point of view of the parents, and it's like, oh, I don't understand this new generation. They're all like weird and blah blah blah, or my parents don't understand me, vice versa, that type of thing, lah. But
yeah.
they're rarely granted equal complexity, and they're both equally enduring, and you understand where both sets of points of views come from, lah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Either with the Pakistani parents or Ray Romano and Holly Hunter. I think we understand the inner lives of all of them very well, to the point where you all of them are fully fleshed out people,
Yeah.
because again, like, they are fully fleshed out people because they're based on real people. It's the plot that ultimately drives home the film's authentic tone.
Hmm.
Choosing to tell a story about a life-threatening long-term illness is hard enough, but
Yeah.
then structuring a romance around it is even harder, especially if you're trying to keep the audience from feeling like you're going to pull a fast bait and switch at the end. Like, oh, it's going to
Yeah.
be a Migo tragedy or whatever. In the big sick though, I think Emily's illness gives the film an excuse to bring in Hunter and Romano very organically.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think, but both are familiar. All of these people are actually very familiar comic actors playing dramatic parts, lah.
Yeah.
But their faces and voices feel comforting in a sitcom way.
Yeah.
That we're in good hands, very capable hands. Again, it's the rare comedy that tackles heavy topics. Like with Kumail struggling to find a place in his own family,
Hmm.
particularly when it comes to his mother. It rings true, especially for anyone who's ever tried to find their way as an adult raised in a traditionalist home.
Hmm.
And it's especially poignant to see that experience through Kumail's eyes as a Pakistani man whose, I guess, American millennial lifestyle clashes with his religion
Hmm.
and the cultural traditions that he grew up with. At that point in time, there weren't too many of these stories out there. Of course, now it's a bit different, lah.
Yeah.
You got Master of None and Rami, as I
Rami.
mentioned.
Hmm.
But like seeing Kumail trying to reconcile those clashes by simply compartmentalizing different aspects of his life It's a struggle that is not unique to Muslims in America, which is also what makes it relatable
Yeah.
in its specificity. Like by being specific, you get other people to understand what Kumail's position is,
Hmm. Hmm.
and tackling all these heavy topics in a comedy. Admittedly, at first, right, if you're pitching it, it seems inadvisable,
Yeah.
but it works because we feel empathy for these characters even when they seem intransient, unreasonable, or
Yeah.
even when they're being, difficult.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
we've come to see how they arrive at their conclusions, and then that's what I really loved about how fully fleshed out everyone in
Yeah.
the Big Sick is.
I agree. I agree. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously because of the way the plot works, the narrative works. Um, I do feel like I wish we got a bit more of Emily.
Mm,
But I mean, of course, you can't. It's not possible, right? Just because of the way that the story turns out.
yep.
But yeah, yeah, I completely enjoyed this. Took me by surprise. It is definitely up there with one of my favorite rom coms of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Definitely top 10 for sure, easily. And it's just so I'm really excited now that Nanjiani is going to be in
The Eternals.
Eternals. Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And the whole like him getting ripped and stuff like that. That was pretty funny as well.
Indeed, indeed, yeah. Yeah. Before we cap off, our final film is an absolute banger of a classic. Still slaps to this day. We'll be talking about the vintage film Casablanca. As I mentioned, one of the most, I think, iconic love triangles in cinematic history.
Mm.
You were telling me off air during our last recording that this is something that you watch with your mother, right?
Yeah, so
Uh,
I was going to watch with my mother, just
yeah.
because, right? Like this is something at least for me, I thought that she would enjoy everything, but she was like, "Oh yeah, okay," we didn't manage to catch it together in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, it's so interesting. I remember watching Casablanca. Oh God, I don't know. I think it was a very strange early 20s vintage film phase.
Mm.
And obviously you have to watch Casablanca, right? Like it's one of the classics. You kind of like have to visit that and some Hitchcock and all of that.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's shot during World War II,
yeah,
which makes its story so much more. It's so insane how topical it was at that time. It was shot during World War II.
yeah, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
so insane. Yeah, yeah. So in the end, I didn't manage to catch up with my mom.
Mm.
Unfortunately, I just wanted to see, um, what it was like to talk to her about a film that, I mean, not necessarily. My mom was born in the late 60s, so not necessarily from her time, but closer to something that she might have watched when she was young.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I got no stories about that. Um,
Ah.
but
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
still rewatching Casablanca was such a trip, though. I have to say,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Oh.
just one of those things that, like, in your memory, you're just like, yes, Casablanca, and then all the good things that people have said over the years kind of compound um and interact with your own kind of opinion of it. But to sit down again and kind of like watch it through was a very interesting experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
I've often called Casablanca a romance film that is not really about the romance
No.
because the romantic plotline is in service to larger themes of being against political apathy,
Yeah.
against complacency, against fascism. Again, like this film takes place in 19 was released in 1942, takes place in the middle of World War II, shot during World War II. It focuses on this American expatriate played by Humphrey Bogart, who must choose between his love for a woman played by Ingrid Bergman and helping her husband, who is a Czech resistance leader, escape from fascist controlled city of Casablanca, to
Hmm.
continue to fight against the Germans. It's a romantic love triangle that kind of tries to almost soften how immensely political it was during this time.
Yeah.
Hollywood at this time wasn't at all political, but they took a stand here. Like they definitely did with Casablanca.
Hmm.
And the romantic love story, which has become so iconic, is kind of a Trojan horse for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not. yeah, like romance definitely takes a backseat, right? It's just simply, the medium in which like it worms what it wants to say over.
Mm-hmm.
So much of the romance that we talk about uh takes form in the uh, takes place in the form of the flashbacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's more like I guess in that fact, like it's kind of more like Before Midnight, where this is post romance and dealing with the consequences of the romance that they had, and how that
Dealing with
plays
what
out.
happened in Paris.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Whatever happened in Paris, these are the consequences now. This is the reality of it,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got to deal, and there are choices to be made. So, um, yeah, it's so Ingrid Bergman. Can I just say she is gloriously illuminating in this film.
Mm-hmm.
It's really something. I think like what was when we did Hitchcock recently, I was saying like the classic silver screen era actresses, man, like how do they look that amazing, for that
Yep.
time, just given the technology then and the fidelity of the film and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
just like, mind blowing.
Yeah, I mean Ingrid Bergman again, lah.
Yeah.
Quite famously very pretty, classically beautiful,
Hmm.
is what people would say.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing about Rick and Ilsa's romance, and I think the reason why it sticks out in people's heads,
Yeah.
despite it being not the major plot point of the film, is that its depiction of love is so bittersweet. It's a depiction of sacrifice,
Yeah.
the sacrifice that is necessary for love or unrequited love. Of things that are more important than selfish love.
Hmm.
Which is an interesting way to approach romance in the 1940s, like a famously very traditionally romantic era.
Yeah.
The whole love triumphs all, or love triumphs over all is not the theme here.
Yeah.
But like the story is about no matter how much these two wish they could return to each other. I think they,
Hmm.
they come to realize that while they once had Paris, they can never truly get it back. Like their brief love is the idea of something, but not really something.
Hmm.
Like however heartbreaking it may be,
Yeah.
Casablanca advocates for cherishing these, moments of emotional vulnerability,
Hmm.
of special connection, whatever your personal Paris may be, even going so far as to memorialize them, but recognizing when it's better to move on.
Yeah.
It is a refreshingly adult and realist view of romance
Hmm.
that is definitely unusual in classic cinema. Like I've never seen a
Absolutely.
romance like this in classic cinema. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, like, that's where we got a lot of the tropes, right? Like that particular era of cinema.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we get Casablanca, who, I mean, everyone from the people who directed it, they starred in it, the studio executives, no one really thought that Casablanca would become as big as it did, right?
Hmm.
For a lot of them, it was just another movie, another slate of the movies being made at that time.
Hmm.
But I mean, obviously, that was something very, very special, and it spoke to the times that people were living in when it was released. And just simply, like, I think the act of simply taking a stance, like Hollywood taking a stance,
Hmm.
um, made it special, right? And made it as big and as well reputed as we are, like so many years later, 60 over years later.
Yeah, the political implications of the plot, the complexity of the love triangle, the fact that you can't really root for anyone in there.
Mm,
Nobody is in the wrong.
yeah.
In the love triangle, obviously the Nazis are in the wrong. Um,
Yeah.
but like it all makes it to be um one of the deepest films of the 40s that I've personally seen.
Mm,
I think maybe like throughout the 50s things started to get a bit more cynical. They started to rebel a bit against the traditional classical romance, particularly with the film noirs of the
mm,
1950s.
yep.
But for the 40s this was so far and away unusual. The varieties of moods and actions and suspense and comedy and drama, the genre mashing,
Yeah.
the combination of sentiment and humor and pathos. It's all very uh, more sophisticated
Hmm.
than I would expect lah. And certainly for an audience from the 1940s to expect from a quote unquote romance picture of the era lah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was I was reading. a bit of what Umberto Eco was talking about the film.
Mm-hmm.
And he was kind of like, I'm gonna paraphrase very badly, but essentially he was saying that Casablanca feels a lot more like an anthology of films than an actual film itself.
Mm.
And a lot of it had to do with the fact that they're just all these characters together in one place, right? In Rick's Cafe.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see on screen is the culmination of those many anthologies running up against each other. And that is why it spoke to the time, right? And to the
Mm-hmm.
audience of that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of mind blowing to read, because like, at no point in time in the first couple of times I watched it, or even in this recent reviewing of it, did I think about it that way. But I do believe there's some semblance of truth to that.
Mm.
Even like the fact that so many of the cast members themselves were refugees at the point in time that they were filming.
Mm-hmm.
That the tears and the emotional outpouring during the duel of the anthems was real.
Mm.
Like all these little things kind of like they add to that, right, in very invisible ways, you know um to how special Casablanca actually is. Like it's so easy. It was easy for me to kind of, oh yeah, Casablanca, great movie, great product of its time. But now being more informed, and or just kind of like reading up a little bit more and trying to understand the context in which the film was made and took place in,
Mm.
really does make it special, more special for me now than it did before.
Yeah, man. I'm still currently like this is 2021 version of myself saying like I'm still very impressed with how the script managed to do so much. It
Mm.
provides a moving love story, like
Yeah.
one of the best love triangles that stands the test of time.
Mm.
But it's still just as strong in its pushing back against fascism, its representation of refugees.
Yeah.
Which it's amazing how timeless the stories of refugees are. And Casablanca is also about being moved past cynicism.
Yeah.
Humphrey Bogart's character is very cynical, very apathetic at first, and about standing for doing something right, even when it's hard. You can't be neutral against evil. You either fight it or you're part of it, right?
Yeah.
And it's something Humphrey Bogart's character learns from it, and it gives me a chill. And he has to sacrifice his great love because of it to help the cause, because just so happens that she had to be married to this great freedom fighter that he can't go against.
Yeah.
Yeah, great story, great movie. A lot of people I think I know. I'm sure you also have like a lot of your like film watching fans like have a averseness to watching classic films, but
Yeah.
like a part of the thing with Behold is that I want to like slowly like kind of tie in a lot of older films from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, to kind of just show that like there's a lot of great stuff in it lah.
Yeah, yeah. I think it has to do with like this entire idea that cinema has grown tremendously, right?
Yeah.
And that is true, right? Cinema has grown tremendously in terms of the scope of what people want to see, the scope of what is being made, the topics and the subject matter that is possible to talk about now and film now, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to what it was in the future, what it was in
Mm-hmm.
the past, right? Like, and as however more woke cinema may be today, right, or has been in the last decade, right, and however more
Mm-hmm.
woke is going to be in the future, we can't take away from the fact that we only have that we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like there's a reason why good cinema back then stands the test of time, right? And
Mm-hmm.
without essentially like Casablanca taking a stand. I'm not saying that it's a perfect movie, right? There's plenty of things within the movie now, watching it now, that's problematic for our time.
Mm-hmm.
But Hollywood taking a stand back then, it's a huge thing, massive,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that in and of itself is good enough reasons for us to give it kudos,
Yeah.
specifically for Casablanca, right? And recognize it as a product of its time, but a very special product of its time, on which cinema has had the privilege to build on top of as time goes by.
Yeah, yeah, it pretty much kickstarted the classical Hollywood movement, shall we say?
Mm.
And keep in mind that this film came out in
True. Yeah.
1942, which was barely 10 years after the beginning of talking cinema.
Mm.
like just the transition from silent films to something of this kind of complexity and politically relevant and moving romance and all of that. To do it over 10 years, right? It kind of blew my mind lah.
Yeah.
Like I can't imagine the transition from silent to talking films, and then like this kind of quantum leap forward in sophistication.
Yeah.
Like there was happening, there was a lot of ground, there was a lot of breaking ground in films at that time. Like
Hmm.
it was happening very quickly. Every few months, there's something new, something more sophisticated happening, etc., etc. Very cool, very fruitful period of artistic innovation in cinema.
Yeah.
And Casablanca was at the height of it, like, especially in the 40s or the early 40s.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So that was it. For our favorite romance films of all time. Any like special honorable mentions of stuff that
Oh.
you would have loved to talk about, but we didn't have time to cover?
Uh, no, nothing comes to mind at the moment. I think. I would definitely say. Oh, I'm just gonna take a moment to say it, right.
Mm.
Guys, 500 Days of Summer is it's a terrible romantic movie.
Yes.
Let's just get it out there. I mean, we've referenced it once or twice.
Mm-hmm.
But we just want to. I just want to make it clear that I really don't like 500 Days of Summer. It's a horrible film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like on the converse side of things, right? Like we've talked about some of our favorite. 500 Days of Summer is not one of them,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. But yeah, I think there'll be plenty more opportunity for us to kind of do romance films.
Of course, of course.
Um, well, I mean, I think it would have been cool. Like You Got Mail,
Yep.
is definitely one of those that I hope we talk about in the future because one of
Mm-hmm.
my favorite rom coms.
Mm-hmm.
When Harry Met Sally, I think that's a classic
Yeah.
that we could talk about as well. But those aren't necessarily, I think, in the same tier as the ones that we talked about today.
I would agree with that. Although you've got me on When Harry Met Sally is definitely top tier rom coms, I
Yeah,
think. And of course, this is we could just do a Meg Ryan thing, lah.
that's
I
true.
mean, those two films for Meg Ryan.
That's true.
I do have to say that like I wanted to bring up some of the more like LGBT stuff, but we have already talked about Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which
Oh
I
yeah,
actually wanted to include here, but then I remembered that we had already
we've
covered
already
it.
done
So
it. Hmm.
so go listen to that Portrait of a Lady on Fire review if you haven't. It's also
Oh,
on the Before podcast.
so good.
It's on our archives, back on our Mixcloud. So go listen to it. More recently, I was really into this love story with a fishman called The Shade of Water,
Oh
which won an Oscar for it.
yeah.
And further back, Singing in the Rain is a really great love story. Call Me by Your Name is really good, great love story. Lots of really good stuff lah. I'm almost hesitant to bring up Woody Allen because
Yeah, but in that same in that same vein, like talking about Call Me by Your Name right now, it's a bit problematic as well, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, I wanted to mention like Annie Hall as well, but that's Woody Allen, so a bit
Yeah.
problematic. But inarguably a great film. Gone
Yep.
with the Wind, also very problematic, but also a great film.
Yeah. Yeah. I've gone. Yeah. Yeah. It is.
Her, I wanted to say her also.
Oh yeah, her definitely
if
ranks up there.
yeah, if I want to include a love story with an AI, her will be up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, like got classics like Beauty and the Beast and stuff like that are all really great.
Yeah. Dances with Wolves, maybe.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't seen Dances with Wolves in so long.
Oh yeah, it's been ages, but that always kind of like sticks out to me. I know, only just thought of it actually.
Mm.
Huh.
I mean, I did more recently rewatch Avatar, so it's pretty much the same thing, right?
Yeah, it is exactly the same story, pretty much.
Yeah.
Just that we don't have to stare at blue people, and we've got young Brad Pitt. So,
Mm.
yeah, interesting. I mean, like a lot of stuff to talk about. Maybe we should do another episode about a different period of romance movies.
Mm.
And not necessarily have to wait till Valentine's Day next year. Well, we'll see how it goes.
Definitely, man. Yeah. All these movies all available on some streaming platform somewhere. I'm sure you can find them.
Yeah,
All obviously they're all available on VOD. I personally have Blu-rays for all of them. So
yeah.
I don't need to download anything. I
I
still have my DVD player.
I believe Big Sick is available on Amazon.
Yes,
Right?
because it's an Amazon production, so
Yeah.
yeah, definitely available on Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah, and the rest of them, I've got I've got Eternal Sunshine on VCD.
Mm.
I have the first two movies of the Before Trilogy on VCD as well.
Hmm.
uh, which is strange because I don't actually have a VCD player anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have a VCR anymore. I still have my Before Sunrise VHS in my cupboard.
Damn, damn. You should hold on to those. Who knows?
I was looking at it the other day, right? It had like weird company. Like my Before Sunrise VHS was next to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze. And I can't believe like of all the two movies I kept from the VHS era, it
Yeah,
was those two movies.
that is fairly bizarre. It's
I know, right?
yeah.
You would
Really?
think that they,
Yeah, really? Teenage Oh my god.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's the one with the ninja rap by Vanilla Ice.
Oh my god. That's crazy. We should,
Yeah.
yeah, we should do, do an episode about that.
See, the thing is, right? I used to, I mean, like I used to really love the ninja rap, like
Yeah.
super love it, to the point where I would rewind and watch it all the time. So when I took out the VHS, I saw they had rewound to a specific point.
Oh
If
my
I had a
god.
VCR player, I'm willing to bet like $100, right, that it will be at the beginning of the ninja rap.
You're kidding. So the last time, whenever this was, right? God
Mm,
knows when. The last
yeah.
time you watched it, you made
What?
sure to rewind it to the beginning of the ninja rap. And
I've
then
never, I've
put
yeah,
it away forever.
I've never every time I only watch that movie to watch the ninja rap. That's
Yeah.
all. I haven't seen the movie back to front since I was a child, but I always rewatch the ninja rap. So I watch the ninja rap and then like
Oh my
rewind back in
god.
case I want to watch it again lah. So yeah, I remember that being like a thing. I would like go home from school, put on ninja rap, like get a bit hype, and then rewind it back to the beginning and put it back. So I can watch it
That
again.
is amazing. I'm half tempted to try and source for a VCR player now.
Yeah, yeah, man.
Oh god.
But I recently bought the Criterion DVDs lah for not recently lah. This was like 4 years ago. But
Oh,
I bought the Criterion DVDs for the Before Trilogy,
oh nice.
because I love the covers for it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
amazing covers. Criterion always puts out good stuff, so uh
yeah,
it's always a worthwhile investment, I guess. Like it's easy for us to kind of forget with how accessible media is these days. But
yeah.
once in a while when something's worth keeping, you just
Yeah, because Criterion has those like written like forwards from other
hmm
directors
hmm
talking about why they love the film, etc. Recently I think Martin Scorsese did the forward for Hereditary. Things like that, like
Yep.
special things that you can't find when you torrent something, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Next week we'll be back with a new episode of Behold, where we talk about our favorite Chinese language films
Yeah.
to celebrate Chinese New Year. And we have a bit of crossover with Valentine's Day because our main topic is In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai,
Yeah.
which can fulfill both things,
hmm
as well as the 2019 film by Lulu Wang called The Farewell,
Yeah.
which received a lot of Oscar buzz at that time. Alongside, actually, all three of these films received Oscar buzz. Uh, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I think was Ang Lee's big breakout thing
Yeah.
in America.
hmm
Can't really talk about that. I haven't seen that in a long time. Recently
Yeah.
rewatched it, forgot how good it was. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing stuff. Yeah, same thing. Recently we watched it. Just like it sits in the back of your mind. It's like a wow moment in cinema.
Mm,
But like revisiting it, and I feel like a lot of I've been saying this a lot. Revisiting some of these older films
mm,
rather, has been a trip, man. I've been enjoying it so much just because cinema means something different to me now than
mm.
it did before. So yeah, super super looking forward to talking about those three.
Yep.
In particular, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and In the Mood for Love, some of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
The Farewell, which I recently just caught up with, is fantastic. Uh,
Aquafina in a rare dramatic
oh
role.
wow! I'm not at all familiar with Aquafina's work outside of the few comedies that she's done.
Yeah, like Oceans. What was it? Oceans 12? Oceans 8. Oceans 8. She was in Oceans 8, right?
Was it eight? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's
She was in
the
Ocean's
all
Eight.
go one.
The All Go
Yeah.
one. She did like the rock, some rock thing
Yeah,
recently.
yeah. She's always like the loud
Jumanji. Yeah, the
Jumanji.
new
Yeah.
Jumanji thing. But damn, she's got jump chops. I'm super super impressed. But we'll get into that next week.
Definitely, yeah, and Ang Lee reminded me of Brokeback Mountain, also one of the great romantic movies of the 21st century.
Oh yeah, man. Oh, that's a huge list. That's a whole different like episode, dude.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe during like the
Pride
I forgot what
Pride Week?
Pride Week.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's
which is in June. Yeah, let's do LGBT romances lah.
yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. I think Pride Week will be a good way to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And yeah, we'll be back next week. Till then, this has been Hit Zero.
This is Isa.
Goodbye, guys.
Ciao.